Look who's talking. That's right. Look who's talking. Today I want to talk a little bit about the flipped classroom and explain to you what it really is. So, flipping means that you flip the content and the homework. We're doing the content outside of the classroom, but we're doing the homework inside the classroom. Well, it's not quite like that. We're not actually doing the homework in the classroom, but we're doing exercises in the classroom. So the idea behind this is this. With the increasing number of students in the class, it is really hard to get through to each individual student. Like, if there's 250 of you, I can't tell who understands what. And even if I could not cater to everybody individually. Like if I have 10 students, I see whether you understand it from your facial expressions. I can ask you questions, you can ask me questions, and it's just much easier. With 250, there's no way I can do that. But that's the only way that you really learn, that I pick you up from exactly the place of knowledge that you are at, you as an individual, and I take you from where you're at to where you're supposed to be. There's a concept that I need to explain to you. You might get it right away, fine, but you might take a little longer because there's something in the way of your thinking and I just need to get that out of the way. And if there's 10 of you, I can do that to each one of you individually. But if there's 250, no way. So what they came up with was to say, well, let's have the students get the content from outside of the classroom. I'll still create the content. I create a lecture that is delivered in the form of a video, and then you watch that before the class, before the actual class. That is, if I manage to get it uploaded on Connect, which is a separate story. And then we're using that content to do some exercises or to apply that new knowledge to new problems. And you also learn from each other. Like some of you might have understood right away, and they can explain to the others what they think they understood. And so you make use of your own colleagues, your own peers. And as far as I can tell, it really works. But I will ask you next week or so what you think. After you've finished watching this video, watch this particular clip again, this clip of me talking, and try and figure out what gestures I was using according to the classification of gestures we will talk about just now. And the other thing I want you to think about is whether we can call gesture or body language a form of language in the same way as spoken language is. Does it have the design features of human language? But again, we will focus mainly on gestures. But of course you could study the entire body. What else am I doing with my hands, with my eyebrows, with my body, with my shoulders? You name it. Okay, so let's get started. When and why do we use gestures? Let's look at a concrete example. First, consider this. You all know this gesture. I don't think I have to explain it to you. It is a non-verbal form, what you may call a sign or a symbol, the equivalent of a word or a sound. And it has a meaning, which I won't repeat here because otherwise this lecture is going to get rated R, and we don't want that. In the literature on gesture, these types of gestures are referred to as emblems. If we think about it from the point of view of the gesture representing a meaning, here's how it works. A gesture, like the middle finger here, represents a meaning that I cannot repeat here. There's nothing inherent about this that would mean what it means. We as a social group have assigned this rated R meaning to this gesture, and the relation between the gesture and this meaning is arbitrary. This is just like with words, where the relation between sound and meaning is also arbitrary, as we have seen. The difference is only that we don't have sound, but instead a hand gesture. To see that gestures are really arbitrarily associated with their meaning, consider this picture of Winston Churchill. He's raising his hand in victory. That's one meaning. But if you're Italian and I do this, it means something very different. Just ask an Italian. This suggests that indeed the relation between a gesture and its meaning is conventionalized. So, these are emblems, fixed expressions that are associated with a single hand gesture. Now let's compare this to what happens when I'm just talking. Your task will be to analyze the gestures that I was using. For now, I'll tell you how researchers classify gestures into different types so that you have something to work with. You can think for yourself whether you find this way of classification useful. Let's start with iconic gestures. They are also known as pictorial gestures. A good example is this. If you ask someone what a spiral staircase is, they will do something like this. Well, it's a staircase that kind of goes around and around and around. The gesture kind of looks like what it's supposed to represent. It virtually draws a picture of a spiral staircase. This is an iconic gesture. Here, the relation between the form, the gesture, and what it represents is iconic. Definitely not arbitrary. Now, there are some words which are doing exactly the same thing. They sound like what they're supposed to represent, and so the relation between the sound and its meaning is not quite arbitrary. A good example of this is when I say, "This class took really long." The longer I drag out the O in long, the longer we interpret the class to have been. Definitely not arbitrary. Another example of this was in your first quiz. When given a choice to name these two objects with these two words, they will use Booba for this and Kiki for this. Definitely not arbitrary. Kiki sounds sharp and Booba sounds round. So just like some words sound like what they mean, some gestures look like what they are supposed to mean. They are iconic. Another type of gesture is known as a metaphoric gesture. An example is this. Like what I'm trying to teach you, and I'm making these videos, it's like putting all this information just into this tiny little video, and then I'm giving it to you, hoping that it will get into your head. This is called the container gesture. It's like setting up a container in the space in front of me that holds all of the information, and I manipulate this container. It looks like something that is similar to what it's supposed to represent, a container, and the container is a metaphor for the video. Okay, so we were 3 down, 2 more to go. Next gesture is the beat gesture. What's that? It simply is a way of emphasizing what you're saying by using your hand, almost like you are conducting your speech. Like, I want to make sure that you really understand. So what's happening here is this. The gesture doesn't represent so much the meaning, but instead it goes along with the sound. In this way, it parallels stress and intonation in spoken language. When you add your beats, you just move your hands in the rhythm of this intonation. That's why it looks like you're conducting speech. And finally, there are the deictic gestures. Those are gestures that point, and they usually point to something or somebody or someplace in the vicinity of the context of conversation, what we call the speech act context. In spoken language, we also have words and expressions that point to the speech act context. For example, the pronouns I and you don't always refer to the same person. They refer to whoever is speaking or whoever is spoken to. So they point to the speech act situation. Same with here and there, now and then, and this and that. We interpret these relative to the speech act context. Since the interpretation of these words depends on the speech act context, we call them deictic, just like the pointing gestures. So, now we have seen 5 different types of gestures. They have a lot in common with spoken language, and they frequently accompany language, as you have seen in the beginning of this clip. So now go back and try and analyze my gestures. Can you categorize them into the 5 types we have just seen? Do you see anything else going on? What's happening with my face? What's happening with my eyebrows? And so on. And you can also start paying attention to other people's gestures. It's amazing how much we actually use them. So again, look how people are talking.